evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight, we are on episode 163, and we figured we'd chat a little bit about sleeping pads. Mainly because I looked through all our episodes before, and it was one of the topics we haven't actually covered up until this point. We have covered similar topics, but not this one specifically. And honestly, regardless of what kind of camping you do, be it hammock, ground camping, whatever, sleeping pads, sleeping mats, they can all come into the equation. And,
yes.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
No, you've just reminded me of something else that's a few feet away that we could talk about. But
okay, fair enough. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter where you sleep. A good sleeping pad, a good sleeping mat, an underquilt, a ground blanket, something. Something to get a little bit of a barrier between you and what's underneath you, be it air or ground or whatever, makes a huge difference. And there are a lot of options. Some good choices, some bad choices, different styles. There can be a lot to it or as little to it as you really want there to be. So we figured we'd chat about it a little bit, give you our thoughts, some examples that we own, and just leave you with a little food for thought. Or at least that's my 2 cents into this. What about you, Ben?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head with this one.
Too cool.
There's not a lot more to say, but there's a lot to say about it. The one thing someone told me one time is what's underneath you is way more important than what's above you. And that seems to not be the way we generally think. We're all worried about the sleeping bag that's on top of us. We're worried about the tarp that's above us. But if you're laying on a cold, damp ground, it don't matter.
To give an example, and I'm sure you know this from first aid, depending on the weather and the location, if you have a blanket, if you are treating somebody, 9 times out of 10, more of it's going to go under them than over them. Just to try and get, you lose so much heat from conduction, just touching a cold surface, and if you're laying on the ground, for instance, the ground now becomes a giant heat sink. All your body heat's being pulled out, dispersed over that. It's going to stay relatively cold. It's going to start dropping your body temperature really quick. And the colder the ground is and the colder outside temperature is, the more that's going to compound that. It's real easy to have a super warm sleeping bag and nothing under you and still have a real cold night. And that goes doubly true for hammocks, because now you can potentially have moving air under you as well, which is now taking any little bit of residual heat and literally blowing it away in the breeze.
Yes, for sure. But depending on the conditions, the ground is worse than the air. And that's to remember. Like if you're on ice, if you're on wet, damp ground, if you're on rock, it's not just the temperature, it's the comfort. Because if you don't have enough keeping you off of hard, bumpy objects, then I don't know about you, but I'm not sleeping, right?
No. And that's the other thing. Not only do these keep you warm, they add some comfort. And that's important. A good night's sleep makes the camping trip in a lot of situations, because if you wake up and you're groggy and you're sore, it just kind of ruins the whole mood.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's up there. It's one of my top 3 for sure. Good night's sleep, good food in my belly, and no, I blanked out there for a second.
I was going to say, you said 3, Ben.
There's good night's sleep, good food in my belly, and just to be comfortable overall.
I was going to say, staying dry and comfortable is my next one. If you can accomplish those 3 things, everything else is just nice icing. Without those 3, everything else kind of becomes like terrible gravy. It's there, you'll eat it, but man, it tastes bad.
So, how do you want to start this? There's always a route that we can take, and I think I was going to suggest most primitive to most advanced.
I'm very similar. I was going to go with most common or most easily accessible and kind of work up from there. So primitive, accessible, whichever way you want to look at it in that note. So do you have one in mind that you'd like to chat about, and I'll just roll off what you got?
Well, straight up, absolute most primitive, bow bed. The only thing with that, I do recommend some kind of blanket or covering, loose tarps, something to sort of keep the sap and stuff out of your sleeping system and all that.
This is what I have for bow beds and leaf beds. This is, it's just some sort of denim leather backing and sheep wool inside, or sheep
Oh,
fur
that's
inside, and I mean it's super warm. I've literally thrown this like right on snow and laid on it, and you actually stay pretty warm. The thing is, eventually this is water resistant, not
yeah,
waterproof.
yeah,
So eventually you're gonna get damp. But if you have some boughs underneath you, if you have some grass, some leaves, even damp leaves, as long as they're not soaking wet, it does take quite a bit for moisture to get through this. If it's soaking wet, like if water can pool on it or it's pooling, it's definitely going to come through. But if it's just damp, generally you're okay.
yeah. So I mean, the bough bed. I think most people know how to make it, but you go out and you limb quite a few trees. It's always surprising how much it really takes to make a good one. And you're looking at building up like a foot or more
At
of
least.
at least. And once you lay on that, that foot or more becomes
Like,
three
but
to four
it
inches.
compresses at least half, if not more, depending on your weight.
Yeah,
So if you're a heavier individual, much like myself, you're going to need more. Lighter people, kids, things like that, they can get away with, like 6 inches potentially. But no, at 300 pounds, you definitely need a foot, and that's going to compress down. The more is better. My only suggestion for if you make a bough bed or a debris bed or something like that, try to make some sort of system to contain it, and
yeah,
that's just as easy as putting up 4 posts and laying a couple poles down along those, just to kind of keep everything in the place you want it. Because as you roll around and shift, which we all do at night, or the majority of us do at night anyway, that stuff's going to spread out and it will cause kind of like a little dip in the middle, and your butt and stuff will start sinking and it could potentially touch the ground. And then you kind of get in this weird hooped shape and with a damp bottom, and it's not so great. But if you can kind of keep that stuff contained, it actually works pretty nice. I do enjoy a good bough bed or leaf bed or whatever, especially in like the summer. You don't have to
and
worry so much. Oh, sorry.
I was to say, like you said, it's as easy as knocking down a couple of larger trees and just putting them up on your four sides, two on the ends, two on your sides. Boom, you got a crib, and you just fill that with as much boughs as you can. Try to keep the big branches off. You just want the light, fluffy ends of it, and you want a lot of it. So it's not one small tree and oh, I got a bough bed. It's a significant amount, and it's a fair bit of work to make a decent, comfortable bed that way.
It is, and it's why a lot of people think they're the go-to thing. But the reality is the amount of effort you need to put in to make a decent one. Like, I mean, you can just limb the one tree and throw it down and claim it's a bough bed, but I can tell you right now it's not. But I mean, to properly do one, it does take a lot of work, and it takes a little weaving together. Like Ben said, try to keep the bigger sticks out, and all the stick ends, try to keep pointing down into the dirt, not up into you, because those are gonna, poke you.
Yeah, but if you do get it, and if you're in an area with like a cutover where you got a lot of like 5 to 8 foot tall trees that are mostly boughs, you can make one relatively quick. It doesn't take long. Good sharp axe. You go in, click, 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 click. All of a sudden, you've got armfuls and armfuls, and you can go over and do it. But if you're in a denser forest, your trees are kind of high. You end up killing a lot of good living trees to get enough boughs, and it's really a lot of effort. And that's where you start to look at what are the alternatives. And the alternatives can be as simple as the old blue foamy.
Yep. And I have seen people take like yoga mats and purpose them as
Yep.
sleeping pads. Perfectly fine, once again, as long as you're keeping some of the moisture out of it. Prime
I got
example
another.
there.
Yeah. Just get the thicker ones, or if you're going with the really thin ones, you're probably going to want 2 to 3, because there's nothing to them. But it does a lot of stuff. One thing is it does keep moisture away. Like moisture doesn't travel through it. The bottoms, third or maybe even a quarter might be damp, but it won't go all the way through. So you're going to stay fairly dry. It's generally a closed foam cell system, so it keeps you pretty insulated. And little tiny things won't poke up. It won't be super uncomfortable, but a bigger lump, you're going to feel it.
Yeah.
You can mix it with a handful of boughs or something just to level the ground out, or just throw some moss down. And I can't say it enough. Like a good bed of moss makes a really comfortable bed. So you need a couple of something to level it out. But then moss is damp, so something like this, good vapor barrier, and some insulation, and you can make yourself a one comfortable bed with this.
No, totally. Actually, when I was sleeping in, or just learning to sleep in hammocks, I used to use one of those under me. Didn't have an underquilt, anything like that.
Yeah.
You can use them in a hammock. Not saying you can't. It's tricky unless your hammock has, what do you call them? A mat spot there. I know one of yours has them, Ben. It's a little spot, like 2 layers. You can actually slide a mat in the hammock and it stays put. Otherwise, if you try to lay it in the hammock with you, it eventually like works its way up and around you, and it can be a little jimmying and jabbing until you get used to it. But it still works, and it does. It keeps the wind. Like even in the summer, if you get a breeze under you, you're gonna get a cold spot, and that's where that will help.
Yeah.
Very similar to that, and this is the one I got here, Ben. The old big box Mart self-inflating foam slash air mattresses.
Yes.
So they're not very thick. They come out, maybe yay thick. You roll them out. You hit the deflator. The foam expands. It pulls air in. You reseal it up, and this is supposed to make you somewhat comfortable. It's not a bad option. Downside to some of these things, like there's some bulk to that. You know what I mean? So unless you got the room, and you might, by all means, these work pretty good, and they're generally not terribly expensive. You can usually find them online, Amazon, stuff like that, anywhere between $20 and $60. Big box marts have them, like Walmart, Canadian Tire, places like that. You're going to pick them up for generally around $29.99 to $49.99, depending on brand names and all that good stuff. But they all work basically the same. And it's just an closed, expanding foam inside, some sort of neoprene on the outside, almost like air mattress material. And then it seals up, and you do basically have a very thin air mattress with some foam in it. They offer pretty good insulating value, in all honesty, in my opinion. I do couple them a lot with some sort of bow bed, or at least something under it, so it's not directly on rocks. They could be a little prone to, like this one. I don't use it much anymore because it has a hole in it and I can't find it. I have filled it up to the nines and put it underwater, and I see no air coming out of it. I'll go to sleep on it and wake up and it's flat. So it's now more for demonstration purposes than anything. It also works as a good vapor barrier under another mat I have here, depending on where I'm going and what the setup is going to be. But I mean, that's a pretty common one for anybody to be able to go out and pick up.
So I have a unique experience with those. When I was in the reserves or the military, however you want to look at it, and they were issuing my gear, I was at the cusp of when they were getting rid of the Black Betty, which was the big black mattress with like a bag on the end. You used to hook the bag to the mattress. There was like a little male-female attachment you could join to it. You open the bag, close it, roll it up, and you had this big, thick air mattress. It was like 4 to 5 inches thick. It was awesome. And it rolled up to next to nothing. The guys loved it. And then they brought out the self-inflating mattress, very similar to what you showed us there. They came out, and some people really loved those because they inflated on their own. You didn't have to do any work. They were relatively thin. They had this weight advantage. And it was a big debate over which everyone wanted to use. And so it was a mix in my platoon, squadron, group, whatever you want to call it, of what people use. But most of us ended up using the self-inflating ones. The only thing I found is they're ridiculously slippery.
Yep.
So
your sleeping bag tends to shoot right off them.
So the story I remember is we were doing an exercise, and we were on this like burn. If you know what a burn is, it's a little artificial type hill, and it was great because we had this like covered area, and we all laid on the burn. We had our heads sticking out so we could see across the field, and we were kind of protected. And this is where we were sleeping. Our job was to keep an eye up. We had a fire team partner, so you'd sleep. So I'm sleeping on my little air mattress in my little sleeping bag, my head stuck up, my rifle next to me. I'm all ready, and it's my turn to sleep, and I'm sleeping, and I'm just waiting for my fire team partner to wake me up. And all of a sudden, I feel something hit me, and I'm like, oh, it's time to wake up. And I stand up, and I'm looking around. Like, there's no fire team partner. There's no tent. There's no sleeping bag. There's a sleeping bag. There's no sleeping mattress. There's nothing around me. I'm like, what the hell's happening? It's pitch dark. I'm reaching forward, and there's nothing but hill. I start walking up the hill, and I find the back of my tent, which was just a ground cover, like teepee style tent.
Yeah, just the
A-frame style tent, open front and back. And I had slid right out the back and shot right down the hill.
That is potentially a problem with these things. And I do agree they tend to get a little slippery.
But I had trouble with mine leaking, and I found that it didn't always reinflate. The newer ones are significantly better,
Yeah.
though. They
And
tend to.
this is an older one, and I think that's all it is. I think age just caught up to it, and it's probably got some pinholes through the seams or something like that. Not enough to show when it's underwater, but enough over the course of a night it's probably losing its air. And I do find that with most of these self-inflators, they tend to wear out, but I guess you say that about any real piece of gear you're going to use with any significant use.
Yeah.
But the benefit, cost isn't that bad. You can usually pick up a good one. And I've seen them go up to like 4 inches thick now, too. Like, you can get some pretty thick self-inflating mattresses.
Oh yeah, no, there's some good options out there. They're neat. They're interesting. I don't. They're not my go-to at any point, but they are something that I've always kind of thought was interesting. I don't find to give me a lot of comfort, and that was my biggest complaint with it. Is they are relatively thin. You do feel things through it pretty easily. Um, so not as comfortable as you think. Really good insulation value because that self-inflating is a foam version of itself, so heat doesn't travel through it very well. So they serve that well factor very well, and they are a good system by every means. Just don't sleep on hills. That's my advice.
And that's fair. That's a good point. So moving on from that, the next one that I have, and I'm just going to piggyback this one because it's right here and it kind of goes with it, is the actual just straight up inflatable mattress. And these are real common. A lot of people love these. They take them tent camping, and they're not a bad option. The benefit of these, they get pretty thick. They're going to keep you from anything that's touching the ground. Moisture won't wick up through them. Relatively inexpensive. I think I got this personal one for around $19.99, maybe $29.99 tops. I've used it a couple times. Works good. They hold a fair bit of weight. Easy to inflate. Very low maintenance. For what it is, it packs down somewhat okay. I leave this one in the box because technically it was supposed to be my kid's, and I ended up using it. So eventually I'm going to seal that box back up and she will have it, but it just served my purpose good. The downside to these inflatable mattresses, I find they can hold some cold. You still almost need something between you and the mattress. The mattress is almost for comfort. Then you still need some sort of thermal barrier between you and the mattress. I do find you can hold a bit of cold in them. And I noticed that when Mel and I go camping, we take that mammoth sleeping bag that are hanging there on the wall and a queen-size air mattress. We throw a tent. We do some glamping because we're just usually not far from the truck. We take the four-wheeler, whatever. So we have options to bring all kinds of crap with us. But you still, like with the cheaper sleeping bags we had previous to this one, you would wake up and the underneath you would be kind of cool. And just there wasn't really a lot of thermal trapping there. The cold would come up through the ground, just sits in that air pocket in the air mattress, and it just kind of sucks some of the cold out of you. But
an awesome little addition to any camp kit is a Reflectix layer. And the cheapest, quickest, easiest way to find a decent Reflectix layer for a personal use is windshield reflectors, those accordion style ones. And I have one just over there. I'm not sure I'm going to get up and get it. We've all seen them. You see they open up, they cover your full windshield. Mm-hmm. That more than covers from the top of your shoulders to the bottom of your knees. And if it doesn't, you are a giant.
You are a very big individual.
But it works really well. And I've used them in hammocks, and I've used them on sleeping bed, just on the ground. I've used them on the foam mattresses. I've used them. They work surprisingly well. They do not give you a comfort level from like objects, but what they do give you is a huge heat reflection, because the silvery material reflects all your radiant heat away from you, and then there's like a bubble wrap layer, a thin area, and that gives you an insulation value on top of that. And man, it makes a huge difference. You can sleep out in the winter in a hammock with one of those underneath you, and you're not freezing to death.
I was going to say, my first experience with those was the upgrade from the yoga mat. I went with one of those, I think by your suggestion too. We chatted very, very briefly at the first gathering, and you said, oh, hey, I've used this before. And I was like, okay, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. Went out and got one, and you know what? It was amazing how warm you can keep yourself with one of those things.
I've been tricking you since then.
Yeah, you really have. I got thinking about it because I had one too. It's out in the sunroom with my hammock, funny enough. And I'm like, when did I buy that? And I'm like, I bought that right after the first Bushcraft meeting. Why did I buy it? What? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it was Ben told me to buy that thing.
Sounds like.
Because I think you walked by, because I was at the start of it. I had the blue tarp set up and stuff, and you just kind of stopped and looked, and you said, "Did you sleep good?" I said, "Oh, not bad. I got a little cold underneath." And all you said was, "Grab a window reflector. They hold a lot of heat," and you just went on along your merry way. I was like, "Okay."
I think that was right. How weird, eh?
Yeah.
Anyway, no. So that's another method, and you can do a lot of stuff like that. There's a lot of things you can use. One of the things I tossed up earlier, this is a little tiny cheap cotton drop cloth. You can use that to just kind of, it gives a breathability between you and something that doesn't breathe well. A lot of the foam mats, especially the air mattresses, they don't breathe well, and it creates this clammy feel. Throw something like this in it. If you have a bit more room, wool blanket. Not much beats a wool blanket, and like you said earlier, with this stuff, having it underneath you is oftentimes as valuable or more than having it over the top of you. In fact, in an emergency situation, if you're in the woods, the clothing you have on you will probably keep you fairly warm. What you want to do is keep yourself dry and comfortable. Literally, the most basic shelter that you can kind of set up is some kind of waterproof material underneath you, some debris you have, and wrap yourself in a blanket and have a tarp laid on top of you. It doesn't even have to be suspended. You will keep the wind off you, the moisture off you. You'll stay relatively dry and comfortable, and it's a very basic, shelter sleep system that would work for you. Sort of a minimum idea.
You know what I didn't do, Ben? This entire episode, I was like, I noticed we don't have a lot of people in our comments. I never actually put the link on our Facebook page to let people know we were going live. I just said, join us tonight. No link included.
So we are broadcasting, though. So.
Oh, yeah, we're totally broadcasting. I'm just doing it now. Anyway, that's my bad.
Now that we're half over.
Whatever.
Very good. Professionalism, our us.
Hey, we never claimed to be professionals with computers. At least I didn't.
So we've covered a lot of the things we have here, actually. There is at least one system that we haven't really talked about that I think you may have. I know I have. And it's the more ultralight.
Mine still has the tag on it, buddy. Only because I got lazy and never actually took it off.
Fancy. So, I mean, I have two of these now. I have a blue one and an orange one. And I have other versions that are somewhat similar.
Mm-hmm.
And all these are relatively lightweight, small air mattresses. They blow up to a couple inches thick. And you know what? Shockingly comfortable. For years, I've seen people use them. I said, oh, man. I just thought of like the self-inflating ones. They weren't that thick. They weren't that comfortable. How are these things going to be any better? And they are shockingly much better. And the fact that they're usually made of a whole bunch of little chambers just seems to mean you don't need that much air. It keeps you off the ground. It keeps this like insulation value to it. Especially these, they have some kind of like silvery white foam that just sits in the middle. It's just very thin, and it makes a difference. I think these things are rated to R4.
4.5. I think I looked it up.
Yeah.
So I mean that's quite a rating too for an inflatable mattress. If anybody is wondering, like that's a decent thermal rating for a sleep pad. Honestly, I mean there is better. Don't get me wrong, but you're getting into some big money with that. These were what, $70, $80?
Something like that. Yeah. I've always enjoyed them. I've used mine quite a bit, and it is sort of one of my go-to. Even with the hammock, sometimes when I want to drop bulk, getting rid of my underquilt and throwing one of these in, is it better? Kind of. And I say this because it doesn't give you much insulation on the sides. There are there are mattresses similar to this that have wings that kind of come up your sides. Those would be as good or better than underquilt. But if it's not that cold out, using something like that, what's underneath you is going to stay warm. The only spot you might find it is on the sides where the insulation of your sleeping bag gets crushed and there's no sleeping pad underneath you. There are things you can do about that. Just sort of figure it out. Push a little bit more material in along your sides. Maybe you change your clothes, your jacket or something. There's things you can do to sort of buff up that little bit of insulating area. And Bob's your uncle, you can be pretty warm.
But generally, in a sleeping in a hammock, it is underneath you that really hits the bulk of the coldness, and it's usually about, like you said, from your knees to about your shoulders.
Yeah.
And in a hammock, kind of stresses on your back and bottom a little, but these things are long enough. The only thing I found with mine, it was kind of narrow, but I mean, comparative to what? You know what I mean? It's like, oh, that's so narrow. And then I got thinking about it, and I'm like, why do I need more room? It was enough that I could lay on it, and I was comfortably suspended, and I could roll to my side. Like, I had to shift and stay on the mat, but I was fine, because I am a side sleeper. If you do sleep on your side, you can sink through them a little bit, so just be aware of that. But as you get used to sleeping on your back, they are incredibly comfortable and surprisingly warm, like Ben had mentioned. And at the cost point for what it is and the size it is, because this is so much lighter, so much smaller than that other closed cell foam mat that I had, or that self-inflating foam mat, the cost, the little bit of extra you spend for it is really, really worth it.
Yeah. No, I don't regret my purchases. I've met one person that bought one like this, and they complained they just couldn't find to get it comfortable. You've used yours. You've had no real issues.
No, like I said, sleeping on my side, I dipped through it. But, I mean, they're not meant for you to sleep on your side. The self-inflating mat is not made for you to sleep on your side. The air mattress, you can get away with it, but it's also like 6 inches thick. So keep that in mind. If you are a sound side sleeper, 2 things I will tell you is a normal mat, you're probably not going to be super comfortable with, and a hammock, you're definitely not going to be comfortable with until you learn to sleep on your back.
Yeah, for sure. Although I have a sort of side sleeping method I can do in my hammock that's not too bad.
I can do it for short periods. You showed me, and once again, I stole it, and I kind of pull my legs up. It's kind of half fetal position, and I can get quite comfortable for about an hour. And that's all you really need. And then you can shift back to your back and sleep for another hour, and you just kind of rotate back and forth, and it makes a pretty good night's sleep.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what I find. I have to do half hour to an hour and a half on one side, and then you rotate, like you said, and then you can go back. And 3-4 times throughout the night, probably 1 or 2 pee breaks in the middle.
I was about to say, about the time I start to change up is when I need to get out and have pee anyway, so it all works out fine.
Do you want, because it's not really relevant, but I guess the one thing in a sleeping bag is your under quilt, which is just a sleeping bag strung up underneath.
And I was going to see if you had a sleeping quilt or an under quilt there, or at least let's talk about them, because they are kind of like a ground sheet for hammock camping.
You have one there belonging to me.
Yeah, I do. Actually, it's packed away, honestly. I got to get it up to you, obviously, for the next little while. But yeah, anyway, like Ben said, an under quilt it's basically a sleeping bag that attaches to your guy lines for your hammock, and it just sits underneath you, and it kind of cocoons you up and around. And they work super well. And there is a little knack to getting them attached and making sure water don't run in on them and stuff like that. That's why I have Ben's. But it's...
Is it dry yet?
Oh, yeah, it's totally dry. I had it dry for ages. I aired it out. I packed it up. It's literally in my truck, I think, because I got to drive it up to you. Yeah. But no, they're super nice, and they add a ton of thermal value to you. And like I said, there's a bit to setting it up, but there's great videos online for that. And we talked about it a little bit in our hammock video as well, so if you want, you can go back. That's one of our normal videos. Shows an entire hammock setup and how to set up a underquilt and stuff like that. If you want more information, just literally hammock underquilt setup. And start watching some YouTube videos. There's a couple different opinions on them, thoughts on styles, and downfilling and stuff like that. And I really encourage you, do a little bit of research, find out what makes sense to you, and if you are thinking about getting one, you will not regret getting it.
Yeah.
But underquilts are kind of more your thing, Ben, simply because you have more experience with them. What's your opinion on a good underquilt? What should you look for, I guess?
It's the same things you want to look for in a good sleeping bag, to be honest with you. Generally, what I'm looking for is something that's lightweight, good loft, and has good attachment points, as opposed to a sleeping bag where you kind of want a zipper or something. In a hammock or in any sleep system, because we're only at a half hour, which we rarely do. So let's throw a little bit in there. Any good sleep system. What people don't realize with the sleeping bags is when you sleep in your sleeping bag, the bottom half of your sleeping bag is virtually useless anyways. It really isn't giving you any warmth or comfort. So a lot of people have gone to quilts, and it's by cutting off about 1/3 of the sleeping bag. You save that weight. Well, in a hammock, you want that more than that third, so you actually have like basically the same size of a sleeping bag, at least half of the size of a sleeping bag, and it wraps up your side. So it just needs to loft and be lightweight. If you can afford it, you get a down one, and it takes up very little room, weighs almost nothing, and it's very comfortable. I don't afford a down one, so I have synthetic ones. They work very well. My problem with them is bulk, but for comfort, especially like winter camping, you can't beat a good underquilt because it's going to keep you more comfortable. It just, it's does the same thing your winter jacket does. It lofts up around you, keeps the wind off you, and it straps up underneath. And that's the thing we learned with Robert, that if you string it wrong,
they'll hold water.
If you choose the wrong method, it will go down to guidelines and fill up
fills up the underquilt, and then you start splashing around it and freak out for a bit. But something that would have fixed that real easily would have been some drip tags on my guy lines, honestly.
Yeah.
And I mean, that can be as simple as a pop can tab. Like literally one of those can work as a drip line if you throw it on there. It just needs something for the moisture to hit and drip off. And I should have known better because I knew we had wind and I knew we had lots of rain. Right. And it was what it was. But
me and Sky slept through that night dry as could be.
Yeah, not so much me.
Not so much.
But say la vie, learned a lesson. You know what I mean?
But we nearly had Sky was a Chicken Little running around the skies falling, didn't we?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I knew it wasn't logical, but I was absolutely terrified that the lake had flooded because it was raining hard. And then the next thought was, oh no, Steve's in a hole. He's done for.
Yeah.
But. Oh, well, say la vie, like I said. Learned a lesson, learned an important lesson, and there was really no harm, no foul. I had a backup, I crashed in the car, things were good. Still had a decent night's sleep. I dried out by the next day.
Oh, we had a great time.
So.
And, great stories. So nothing, nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Exactly.
Definitely nothing. But, yeah, so that's kind of like the under quilt we chat about, a bit about sleeping bags. But the big part is, some kind of pad, get something underneath you, find something that works well. There are plenty of other methods out there that I've heard, as much as even like the wool blanket and a Reflectix. Wrap the wool blanket around a piece of reflective, lay on top of that. You're going to get yourself a pretty warm, comfortable sleep. Put a plastic bag underneath that for vapor barrier on some moss, and you'd have a pretty good system. It wouldn't be all that much weight, and honestly, you're only out $10-15. You go down to the average thrift store. Regularly, you will find the wool blankets, and I got most of my window reflectors from Canadian Tire on clearance for under $5.
Sometimes see them at the dollar store. I have seen them there. Not all the time. Don't go there expecting to buy one. Just as you go to the dollar store, keep your eye open, and they work amazing. I've even, when I was a teenager, I had a feller that I used to camp with quite a bit. He used to use a piece of Silverwall. If anybody doesn't know what Silverwall is, it's basically styrofoam with mylar on either side. You usually put it on the outside of your house, put your siding and stuff up, and it works as a thermal layer. So he got a piece of that, taped up the sides, and after using it so much, he actually got it so it rolled up fairly well, and he just used it as a thermal barrier. Not so much for, like, comfort, but just to keep the cold off him, because he could sleep on rocks and he wouldn't care anyway. Not the brightest fellow around, smart like dump truck, but always warm. Exactly. He can pick up truck, but can't spell it. But yeah, there's lots of things out there that you can try. These are just some ideas that we gave you because, well, we had them and we can talk about them. We've tried a few things and just given you our experiences. And honestly, it is, once again, going back to what we started this podcast with, it is amazing how much heat you will lose underneath you. And that's why it is important to have some sort of thermal layer under you as part of your sleep system, be it any one of these or something else that maybe you folks out there have come up with a little bit more creative, and we'd love to hear about those things too.
I guess the last thing, let's just summarize. What are you looking for in a good under pad, sleep pad? Is you're looking for something that protects you from the ground for temperature. So a thermal layer, a vapor layer, something that's protecting you from the moisture, and then last but definitely not least, comfort. So you want something that's going to give you some kind of gap between the ground to absorb the imperfections in the ground, so you don't have roots and rocks and sticks poking you in the back, because that's miserable. You need to stay nice and warm, so it has to keep you warm, and it needs to keep you dry, because if you're wet, you're not warm, you're not comfortable. So you're looking for something with comfort, heat, and dry. Those are the things you're looking for. If you can get something that does all three of those things, you've got yourself a decent sleep pad. I don't care what it looks like. I don't care how what effort you had to put in to get it. If to get you through a night, that's going to get you there.
Yeah, and like I said, there's lots of homemade things that you can make that are going to do that job. By all means, we strongly suggest you guys get out there and experiment a little bit. As always, test it out at home, be safe. That way, if you find out maybe it's not as warm as you thought, you can still pitter-patter inside and have a good night's sleep.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, a little shorter episode, but I think still just as important. We tried to keep it to the point, rambled a little less, so I think it's a good night. Anything else you want to say in closing, Ben?
No, 30 minutes was our goal for years, and we've never reached.
We finally hit one, and honestly, that is still kind of our goal, is to hit around 30 minutes, and we rarely do it. So tonight, we're going to try and keep to it.
Very good. Night all.
Night, everybody. We'll see you next week.